Welcome to Religion and Art Live at St. Stephen Walbrook. Welcome to everybody who's here in person. Welcome to everybody who's watching online. I'm not sure which camera's on, but it'll be moving around. Elizabeth is doing the live stream and will be mixing for us. We're very grateful for that. We're also very grateful to Reverend Stephen Baxter for allowing us the use of this beautiful space. You can visit St. Stephen Walbrook's website if you'd like to know more about this historic church, and donations are always welcome. So, in a moment I'm going to hand over to my colleague Nina Danino. My name is Mark Dean. I'm a chaplain at University of Arts London. I coordinate Arts Chaplaincy Projects alongside Nina, and today Nina is one of the performers alongside Donna Matthews and Antónis Kastellaní and Dan Byrne-Smith. There we are. So the performers are going to be making use of the whole space, I think. So please feel free to move around, those of you who are here in person, and Elizabeth will guide those of you online around with the different cameras. So hopefully you will feel part of this performance. You're very welcome. Please also stay behind afterwards. The performance runs starts in just a moment. It'll be followed by a Q&A, a discussion between the performers. You're free to ask questions, invited to ask questions. And after that, we will be closing the live stream, but please do, those of you who are here in person, please do stay on. There'll be tea, biscuits, and conversation. Also, if you would like to join our mailing list, those of you who aren't already on it, please see any one of, James, myself, or Nina afterwards, and we gladly put you on our mailing list so you can hear about future events. The next one will be at Holy Trinity Prince Consort Road in a month's time with Linda Mary Montano and friends, and we have two others after that. I'm now going to hand over to Nina.
Yeah, just to say that we'll be performing in this area, so those of you who are sitting over there might like to gather around this side if the altar isn't in your way, but it's up to you. All right. So Donna and Antónis, would you like to? What do you believe? What do you think? What do you love? music? What is your climate? What hour of the day do you love best? What are your whims? Your extravagances? Your antipathies? Or your enemies? Who is your demon? What haunts you? What frightens you? What gives you courage? Do you love? What do you remember? What image? What have you been? Are we strangers? Have we dreamed? Are we? Anything? Are we here? Yes to everything. The same rhythm. Echoes, echoes, echoes,
that despair is the sickness unto death.
Despair.
Despair is a sickness of the spirit,
Despair.
of the self, and so can have three forms.
Despair.
Being unconscious in despair of having a self, inauthentic despair, not wanting in despair to be oneself, and wanting in despair to be oneself. The human being is spirit, but what is spirit? Spirit is the self. But what is the self? The self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which is its relating to itself. The self is not the relation, but the relation's relating to itself. human being is a synthesis of the infinite and the finite, of the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity. In short, a synthesis. A synthesis is a relation between two terms. Looked at in this way, a human being is not yet a self. In a relation between two things, the relation is the third term in the form of a negative unity. And the two relate to the relation, and in the relation to that relation. That is what it is, from the point of view of soul, for soul and body to be in relation. If, on the other hand, the relation relates to itself, then this relation is the positive third, and this is the self. Such a relation which relates to itself. A self must either have established itself or been established by something else. If the relation which relates to itself has been established by something else, then of course the relation is the third term, but then this relation, the third term, is a relation which relates in turn to that which has established the whole relation. Such a derived, established relation is the human self, a relation which relates to itself, and in relating to itself, relates to something else. That is why there can be two forms of authentic despair. If the human self were self-established, there would only be a question of one form. Not wanting to be itself, wanting to be rid of itself. There could be no question of wanting in despair to be oneself. For this latter formula is the expression of the relations, the self's total dependence, the expression of the fact that the self cannot, by itself, arrive at or remain in equilibrium and rest, but only in relating to itself, by relating to that which has established the whole relation. Indeed, so far from its being simply the case that this second form of despair, wanting in despair to be oneself, amounts to a special form on its own, all despair can in the end be resolved into or reduced to it. If a person in despair is, as he thinks, aware of his despair and doesn't refer to it mindlessly as something that happens to him, rather in the way someone suffering from vertigo talks through and internally calls delusion about a weight on his head, or it's being as though something were pressing down on him, etc. Neither the weight nor the pressure being anything external, but an inverted image of the internal. And once now on his own, all on his own, and with all his might, to remove the despair, then he is still in despair. And through all his seeming effort, only works himself all the more deeply into deeper despair. The imbalance in despair is not a simple imbalance, but an imbalance in a relation that relates to itself and which is established by something else. So the lack of balance in that for itself relationship also reflects infinitely in the relation to the power which established it. This then is the formula which describes the state of the self when despair is completely eradicated. In relating to itself and in wanting to be itself, the self is grounded transparently in the power that established it.
1, 2. 1, 2. to come together to in a small conversation around this around the event. Just discuss. Maybe if you want to join at a certain point, have any questions, you can do so. Shall we sit here?
So I think the conversation we had when Mark approached us to do something here, we began thinking about themes that overlapped through our practices, things that interested us, and we just started thinking about key themes or key words that had some resonance for us. So I don't know if anyone saw the kind of keywords that were on the flyer for this, but we came up with the aesthetic attitude, mystical experience, liminal states, sites of transformation. And there were these kind of key themes that even though the three of us have quite different ways of engaging with these ideas, we come from different angles, and we're actually, our emphasis is in different places. We found that we share a lot of parallel with thinking about some of the ideas, and often I think how we get into liminal states or how we experience mystical or aesthetic experiences, they're very different, but they also share some similarity. And I think for me, the parallels I find between the aesthetic attitude, which is one of where our will or desire becomes, we become into a more selfless state when we have an aesthetic experience. It's a sort of unself-consciousness, and that shares parallel with mystical states and liminal states where we lose that sense of our self-consciousness. So I think that's what interested me in trying to make something where I could devise a space where to lose my sense of self-consciousness, which I don't know how successful that was, but to actually attempt that, I think in a public space, to devise something where that state is explored as a space of encounter was an interesting engagement for me. So in some ways we're trying to provide a space here where something can happen. That was my interest in trying to explore those.
Yeah, I guess I should say something about the text I was reading. It's from the beginning of Søren Kierkegaard's work, The Sickness Unto Death. And when I was asked to take part in this event, I immediately thought about this text because I was thinking about it anyway. I've been thinking about Kierkegaard in general, and this text is really interesting me in how it's a text about spirituality. It's a text about Kierkegaard's own relationship to spirituality and to sin and to God. But it's also a text about relation. And the more I thought about this text and the more conversations I was having with Nina and Donna, the more interested I became in the idea of relation and how the idea of self as an individual is both totally dependent on relation to oneself, but also to another. And so I'm not sure if you get any sense of what the passage that I was reading, because it's very, very dense and I'm still struggling with it. But he's essentially saying that this relationship to oneself is established within something else. And he's saying that something else has to be, for him, God. That's what it's established in. but he goes a lot further than that within the text. So he's talking about relation in terms of avoiding despair, and he's equating despair with sin. Despair is the sin, and that being in a state of despair is being in a state of perpetual sin. And the only way out of this is to learn to relate to oneself, which is also at the same time learning to relate to the other ethically, but also in relation to God. So I'm very interested in that. I'm very interested in how essentially he's kind of writing the foundations of modern psychology and psychotherapy, which is kind of what I'm training to do right now. You know, he's telling us that we have to understand ourselves, that we have to understand the parts of ourselves in relationship to ourselves in order to function within anything greater than ourselves. But I'm also really interested in how to work in an aesthetic field, or in a musical field, or in any field, is also a relation. So how the performance itself isn't just something that I come up with, but is established with other people. And it was still changing today. I mean, what I ended up doing with Antónis wasn't what I came in thinking was actually going to happen. So that relationship, or that relational element, is kind of ongoing and perpetual. And yeah, it's very, very interesting to me. The other part of that is you. So I'm also thinking about, well, what's this relationship to the audience? And I have no idea. That is a sort of great unknown that I'm trying not to worry about too much. But it was something that came up, and I think in our early meetings I was kind of caring less about the audience in terms of what they might be subjected to. I said, I don't have any problem with making an audience listen to 20 minutes of terrible noise. I think I actually said that. And you weren't very happy that I said that. And so I had to rethink, well, hold on, what is the relationship between us in terms of what our expectations are? So I'm really interested in that. So for me, it's a very enriching experience and an opportunity to sort of carry on working with this text. Kierkegaard does talk about the aesthetic and the aesthetic state, and he sees it as a solipsistic and troubling thing, that Kierkegaard's very much interested in the ethical state, in which one is responding more to the other, but he doesn't deny the aesthetic state. He's just sort of very wary of what he sees as aesthetics, which is a kind of self-serving pleasure, I guess, rather than, in a way, for him, it's the opposite of a turning towards or an experience of God. But maybe I won't get into that. Nina?
I feel actually that with that song that I sang karaoke is to Ash Ra Tempel's Light Look at Your Son, which is from the album Schwingungan. And I tried to get, the singer in that song is somebody called John L. And he, I've just been interested in that track for a long time, a few years, because I used the music of Ash Ra Tempel for some parts of my film, Solitude, because they did the soundtrack to a film that I've got in my film, so I used the track as it was. I didn't cut anything up. So anyway, I've been in touch with Ash Ra Tempel's music in that way since then, but this track is not in my film, and this track is sort of something I just got interested in terms of the build-up. And of course, Manuel Gotching is an amazing musician and guitarist, and I just loved the way that the guitar builds up, and so I'm really interested in the guitar actually, and I couldn't hear it so well in this space, even though actually when we played it, when we came here to do a sound check the other day, it was really strange, because when the music started to play through the speakers of the church, it felt almost like an intrusion into the church, something like, was a little bit like a presence that was not an alien kind of presence in a way. This time it felt quite different. Maybe it's because we were in communion and doing the things, you know, in relation to each other and so forth. But the first time it was played, which was with Donna when we came, it just felt like a very intrusive sort of presence into the church. And you know, in a way, that's kind of what I was interested in some way, about this track and about Ash Ra Tempel, about how it's psychedelic rock, you know, but it's also a cosmic, you know, it has that aspect of trance, of hypnosis, or the hypnotic, which I did feel a little bit of it when I was singing it, actually. I did feel I got into a bit of a sort of trance with it, you know, so that's a bit that interested me about this music, how it builds up, how it gets you into a sort of space of its own, and how it's music, you know, it's actually music. But the guitars are really the thing that I'm interested in, also the kind of voice, you know, and trying to get the voice to reach extremities in a way, which I'm interested in. Yeah, so I don't know how, so it was experiential. I don't know what it was doing. I thought at some point it worked, at some point it wasn't working as well as I wanted it to, but it was interesting to do. And I think in terms of like this topic of the liminal and the self and communion, that music is very introspective, I feel. You know, it's a music about the self in a way, you know. So I don't know how that links into the liminal, but we're here in a connective space, so it's sung in a connective, you know, context. I think that's it for the moment, until maybe people want to respond or have things to say, or yeah, I can't, you know, I think that's okay for the moment, and maybe receive comments or questions.
Yes, so if anyone has any questions or thoughts, even observations, or then feel free to, I can bring the microphone to you.
Thank you for sharing your work. So yeah, I'll just share a few thoughts and observations. For me, the experience, I think overall, was a sense of progressive removal from the work in the three pieces. The initial piece was particularly captivating and intriguing, and brought up some, you know, explicit associations around trinities, various different trinities, but without it being laboured in reference. I think there was a real communication between the three voices and presences, and I was really within that work in a way. I think that's, you know, sounds like a work that lasts with you. And the second piece, it was interesting to me that there was a counterpoint. I mean, firstly, there was a 3, there was a 2, there was a 1 in the three works. So the point and the counterpoint in the second piece seemed a lot less resolved. And I'll just share a thought that I have about the kind of juxtaposition between the use of voice, which is something which is experiential and maybe aesthetic, and then the voice that's invested in semantic content, and with Kierkegaard's kind of drilling into his own experience, and I think it would be fair to say struggles with language. It reminded me of something that came up in conversation about, I think, states of despair, what we call depression, gets labelled depression, and a kind of theory that I had came up in conversation a week or so ago about how maybe the kind of frenetic psychic kind of overload that people get when they're going through a long dark night of the soul is a way that the body physiologically has of trying to get to a point of exhaustion where ultimately it releases itself. It's trying to find a strategy whereby it can kind of escape this state of stress. So the only way it has of kind of intelligently finding its way to this is to just bombard until eventually you just collapse. And I wondered whether there's something about the kind of philosophical approach. I've thought quite a bit about this, about how the philosophical approach is a way of people. I really had this sense of like an attempt to grip. Kierkegaard was trying to grip something, trying to hold something, and try to persist so far into it that eventually, he would just exhaust himself and would get release. Funnily enough, something I once heard about St. Augustine came to mind while you were reciting, which is that very late in his life, he had a mystical experience, and he never wrote again. I don't know if this is true, but I heard it and it stuck in my mind. So he spent a lifetime trying to kind of resolve and synthesize these philosophical approaches from the classical world to the Christian world, and has become a lasting kind of voice in our description of the world of thought. But eventually he kind of had a point of contact with this thing that was beyond, that eventually just silenced him, and he just didn't need to do anything other than just live with that from that point onwards. And that, as I say, that came to mind, that thing of like there's a hunger. I think at the start of the text, the key thing that stuck with me was about the synthesis of finite and infinite, and that hunger for the infinite, that hunger for release, I think is something that was then in the background of what I found quite an unresolved piece. And then finally, really, it was interesting to hear what you said, Nina, about the sound test that you did. I really had that experience of the not being present with your work and your piece that you did there, and becoming conscious of the building and the presence of the building, and I really had a sense of that disjuncture. I don't know if that accords with what you said about your experience in the sound check. And I felt like the intent of the work was very much to draw you in and bring you to somewhere cosmic in a way that we really, I think, in lived experience, a lot of people might identify with, getting stoned and listening to prog rock, and zoning out into the cosmos. But instead, I was, the building was really kind of encroaching and taking my attention in a way that was, that was even more unresolved. And I thought it was, for me, I was like observing you. There was like there was like a tentative presence that you had in relation to trying to kind of link up with something that would get beyond this space, but it never did for me. It stayed with more like, I was being drawn into like going, wow, this is quite a place, quite a stage set that we're in here, and so that's the kind of strongest experience that I had with your work. So thank you very much for your work once again.
Thank you for those very attentive thoughts. I'll just pass the mic back for responses.
I think there was a lot that you just said then, which does tie into our thoughts before these pieces, which was all of us have a desire to point to something beyond, the physical, something eternal, something, and Nina would think of more of jouissance as a frame of reference for that state, and then you were looking at Kierkegaard. But I think that's something that's really present in all our pieces, is the desire to find a way to be able to point beyond, but to how we access that beyond ourselves. I mean, I was, speaking glossolalia, utterances, and that sort of ties into a lot of improvised states, which are very liminal for improvisers, where they have a taste of the transcendent beyond. And so I think that trying to access that state, though, that others can enter into that sight of the eternal or something beyond, is really the aesthetic task. You know, and it's the task we do in church. Also, in church, we're trying to, through the things that we do as embodied people, is point beyond. But how we do that, that's where art and the aesthetic and the mystical cross over. That's the overlap, even though they have very different methods for accessing those. And I think it's very hard in this place, because it is such a grand place, and in some ways these pieces we've done are very improvised sketches, really. It's quite a complex thing to point beyond when we're in this space, but do you have any thoughts?
I mean, just to say also, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing all your expertise in this art. And I was just wondering, how do you actually operationally, or how to come up with the theme? And then, as you said, your background is quite diverse, or there is commonality or differences. So how logistically is possible by putting all your ideas together, and then of course you came to this magnificent church and very, very good acoustic. Yeah, so I'm sure you have thought about everything possible to produce your beautiful harmonious sound, and especially also your reading and with the background of your despair. It's just wonderful. I mean, you can feel it. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps I could just address that question. Thanks for your feedback. But it might be worth just saying at this point that Arts Chaplaincy Projects, working with Religion and Art Forum, we don't define religion and we don't define art, but clearly everybody who's involved, who comes along to perform, who performs, but also you participating, all of you, has an interest in the relation between those two terms, which we don't define, but we do recognize that they really mean something to each and every one of us here. So I don't think it is necessarily the case that it's all worked out, and as Donna was saying, you know, that it's kind of, and Dan also, it's experimental, and we take that risk, and you take that risk coming here, but you know, we do appreciate that, and yeah, so that's the context of this. So if anybody wants to talk a little bit further about the relationship between those two terms for them, this isn't prescriptive, but it is the context. I don't know whether I'd like to ask Nina actually, because we worked together for years now, and I've never asked you that question directly. So
yeah, because this is like the third series of religion and art in over as many years, really, isn't it? And it's kind of evolved. We thought that for this series we would, because the previous series was called a forum. Well, we had the talks, which were what they say they were, talks by historians, 4 talks. But before that we had something called a forum where artists presented their work, but sort of like also described it and talked about it in a more objective way. Whereas we thought that for this series we'd sort of get into more presenting the work as practice, like we have done today. So the work in live, as it were, in situ, live, in its own risk element and in its own self-unknowingness and knowingness element. So that, in a sense, and also in its relation to this existing space, because, like you said, you know, you can't not take this space into account when you step into it, and it's part of the work. So with the next session we'll be at another church, and then another church, and then another church, hopefully. So so each space will be different, and each, each intervention into the space will also be different. But yeah, so for this series it was very much like, not so much talking about the work, but doing the work. Doing something, whatever that something. And so we didn't know what that something was going to be when, Donna said, okay, yes, I'm interested, and then Dan came in and I said, well, okay, I've been thinking about this song. We didn't know really what this something would be. And we did a little bit of a tryout in an earlier sort of session, which Anthony kindly invited us to, which was a completely different setup, which was somebody's front room. And it was very, very different experience, really. This was Donna's piece that you just heard. So this something is the thing that we're kind of trying to work out what it is. So there's no sense of having a kind of content that we're trying to deliver or a message or something like that. It's like, what is, really the question is, what is this? And also, what is this in relation to each other? Because the three things are really quite, I love your analogy of a trinity. I thought that was really, really interesting. And also the difference and maybe the crossovers is also interesting, but also the difference, really. They were very different pieces, really. And so, I'm interested in this, the bit that one doesn't know about, in a way. But of course, you've got to know enough about it if you're going to invite people to witness it or to be part of it or to partake in it. So you've got to know enough. But there's this aspect that, well, what is this? I'm not quite sure myself. That's really what I want to sort of say. Similarly with the other events that are coming up, I'd say the similar principles apply, so I hope you'll be able to come to some of those. Do you want to say anything?
I'll just add to that in response to the question of how do we get to this point, there are a lot of conversations. We have spoken, we haven't physically met because I don't live in London, but yeah, we have talked a lot about what it is that we're interested in, what our ideas are, what form they might take. But then those conversations take us into very fundamental places, really, about belief and experience and what our values are when it comes to making work and what our interest in this whole territory might be. And they're not the same for all of us. We do come at this from very different places. But those conversations have been numerous, intense, fascinating, at times exhausting, sometimes come away from them thinking, I don't know what we're going to do, but incredibly fruitful. And it's strange trying to determine how much of the work is the conversation and how much of the work is this. And I guess I've struggled with that balance of things since I was in art school, which was a very, very long time ago. But it's not really real until we've been here and done this with people listening to it.
I think the thing that I benefited from being invited by my good friend Donna was this idea of courage. We've been speaking a lot about different anxieties we've had with being performers in the past and presently. And the thing that I benefited from our piece that we prepared was being seen and understood. And in the previous performance we did a couple of weeks ago at this inaugural event series that I'm running, which is based around the ideas of showing courage in listening consciousness in all very different types of ways in different spaces, was we were sharing similar anxieties with we played in bands together, and we would talk about how we would struggle sometimes with audience members being in a space and not knowing, this idea of self-consciousness and kind of wanting to go somewhere but almost being blocked by environment. So for me, I'm really interested in this idea of like environmental determinism, because a lot of the time I'm dictated by, in a performative sense, by the context with which I'm performing, to the point where having this amazing dome above us here is actually sonically quite overwhelming to sort of be underneath it. So that really in a very experiential sense, that sort of guides the musicality within me is being able to sort of be in a space. But I suppose it doesn't stop there. Yeah, like, you know, I'm really into performing outside as well. Something that doesn't happen as often in being in London. So yeah, I suppose what I benefited from was being able to share a work in progress, essentially, and that kind of not be, as we've all reinstated, is that we weren't necessarily sure of what we were doing. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to not be finite in our presentations.
Thank you, Antónis, and thanks for performing. I might, thinking of coming from different places, I'm mindful that we've got people coming from other places online, and so I'm just going to hand the mic over to James, who I think has got maybe a question or two before, because we're due to finish fairly shortly. I'm going to go and put the kettle on, so please stay for a cup of tea. There aren't any. Adrian, oh, would you like to read out, Adrian?
Yes. We've got one question, but it's a very cryptic question, and I have a feeling people won't necessarily want to answer it, from Adrian, which is, what is if it is always is? All right.
Well, I love Clarice Lispector, and she talks about the is, you know, the thing, the kind of, the am, you know, the am, the is. And I think about that a lot. What is? And I think if we're concluding here, for us all to go away and think about what is something interesting. I think that would be good.
Just say one thing. I mean, if Kierkegaard has one contribution to modern Western philosophy, it's to focus on the question of what is. That's it. I mean, it's the shift of attention from knowledge to being, to the fundamental questions about, hold on, it's not about what life means, it's about what is. That's the question, what is, and how do we be? Not how do we be good or how do we be bad, it's how do we be. So for me, the what is question is really fundamental to a tradition that Kierkegaard kind of spots has been evaded within the history of Western philosophy and then kind of reinitiates for a tradition that then ends up in what we call existentialism. So I'm always thinking about questions around what is. I'm not sure that answers the question necessarily particularly well.
Maybe just to say that what is very much related to the sort of the principles of how we created this event, really, you know, in the sense of it's like I said earlier, you know, it's about what might happen at the time, in the moment, you know, in the space, rather than having like a content or a message or something that, you know, was like say what life, not what it is, but what did you say it was? Life, what is?
Okay, so I think that draws this to a close, but I am going to go and put the kettle on. But I just was struck by, Dan, about your initial statement about not minding annoying the audience with a lot of noise, and I think that's quite easy to do. Maybe that's why Donna was a bit hesitant about that idea. I think what's much harder is annoying an audience by not having answers, not giving people what they think necessarily they're coming to see. I'm not suggesting that's happened here, but it's the risk that we take, I think, and it's a risk I really value. I think that I speak to lots of people about faith in my job, and some people get very annoyed when there aren't cut and dried answers given to every question immediately. I think it's really hard to maintain that space of not knowing. It doesn't mean to say you don't care. It doesn't mean to say you don't have faith. It doesn't mean to say that you're not alive. but it means that you've maybe lived through a period of seeking certainty and actually realise you've got to live with a bit of uncertainty. And I really appreciate many people who've come along to art and religion events are, by now, I think people realise, that you're not sure what you're going to get, but it's always interesting. And today has been really beautiful for me. I've really enjoyed it, and it's the bits that I wasn't expecting that I enjoyed the most. So, thank you all. I know you put a lot of work into this, and I know all of you have made an effort to come here. Really appreciate it. Please do, if you're not already on our mailing list, please do see me or Nina or James. We'll put you on our mailing list. All our events are free, open to all, and we hope to see you again soon. And I really am going to go and put the kettle on now. So, thank you.
Thanks. I think the next event is on the 4th of May.